Hi, you're watching Homo Ludens, the channel on history and board games. I'm excited today as I'm doing an interview that I've wanted to do since I started the channel. Some of you might know Twilight Struggle was my first historical board game. The second one was Sekigahara. And after playing both, I was totally hooked on this hobby. Without Sekigahara, actually, I wouldn't be here tonight recording this interview, talking to you on that YouTube channel. Actually, Sekigahara was also a game of the month for our monthly game club this summer. So if you want to listen to a collective review of the game, I added the link in the description to the podcast so you can have a look after watching the show, obviously. And that's a good time for me to remind you that if you want to support the show and be part of this core community and take part in the game club, well, you can support us on Ko-fi. Anyway, I always wanted to interview Sekigahara's designer, but he's a hard man to get access to. So when 10 years after Sekigahara, GMT released his new game, Charioteer, I thought it would be the perfect occasion to try and have him on the show. And here we are tonight. I am glad to have Matt Calkins on Homo Ludens. Hi, Matt.
Hello, it's great to be here. Hi, Fred.
But thanks for being here. I'm, as I said, super excited to have you on the show. I've been wanted to talk to you about game design, about your work in that field for quite some time now. And it's true that that release felt like the perfect timing.
Great.
So maybe a note for people watching us live. First, thanks for being here, and I want to remind you that you can ask questions to Matt in the chat. So just ask him there, and I will bring them on screen for Matt to answer. Don't worry if I don't bring the question straight away. It's probably because I will keep it for later in the conversation because I tried, as I usually do, to structure the conversation in three major parts. So I might see your question and think, oh, that would work better at a specific time. But as I was saying to you, Matt, earlier before we started the stream, of course, if there is a question you want to react to straight away, just let me know and I will bring it up. And I see that there is a few of you already in the chat, so that's really great. Thanks, Alexandre, for being here. And I can see that there are other Sekigahara fans here, so that's great to see. And we also have Pierre. So we have actually quite a strong francophone presence here, but we'll keep it in English. But that's great. But thanks for everyone who's already joining. Anyway, I guess we can jump into the interview, and I wanted to start by talking about your journey into wargame and gaming in general, and then game design. So before starting to talk about specific games and your latest game, Charioteer, I wanted to start from the beginning and ask you, when did you start playing historical board games?
You know, I've loved games from before I could count. I instinctively enjoyed them. I saw games before, very, very early in life, and I knew I liked them. The complexity, the rich data display, the competitiveness that was part of them, I knew I liked them. But even more did I like them when I realized it could teach you something about the way the world worked. If it gave you an insight into a historical period or a piece of geography, then that's perfect for me. I love history as well.
And what was the game, do you think, that triggered this appetite to explore more historical board games? Where did it all started?
It's probably diplomacy. I was fascinated by a broad range of games growing up, but I had a diplomacy club. I invented one and ran it in high school, and I think that would probably be the one of all of the games that really clicked for me early on.
Do you still play diplomacy today with all the digital implementation that you have? You have Backstabber and all this. Is this something that is still something that you play?
I would love to. It's a matter of time, and I don't have the time. So I don't play any games online, unfortunately. I would be delighted to, but I just can't fit it in.
Yes, maybe for a later moment in life. We always think about this. So in the wargaming community, there is always that thing about this game that you buy for when you retire.
Yes, or my friends and I joke about which games to put in the bunker in case of nuclear war.
Yeah,
right? We'll finally have time, and we want to be sure we've got our games with us.
So do you have a Doomsday game collection already?
Yes, I do.
Okay, we need to talk about this later on. I want to know more about what's in that in that collection. I would be curious to see what are the ones, those games that need to survive the apocalypse.
Oh, it's
But
particularly the war games. I'm fascinated by war games, and I would love to play them more. But it's hard to find someone to play. They take a long time, especially the most interesting ones. And so, in this phase of life, I just can't get to them. But I buy them anyway, and so I
yeah.
have a good collection of war games I haven't played.
So what would you say? What kind of player are you today? Are you only playing light games, or you have rare opportunities, but maybe you go, I don't know, to conventions or stuff like this? What's your relationship with gaming apart from collecting them?
Yeah, I don't play often. I play one tournament a year. It's the WBC in the summer, and mostly there I play games that I'm familiar with. It's been a long time since I got, let's say, 10 reps on any game that I had learned. So I'm mostly playing the ones that I knew 20 years ago. I'm I I have a game group that maybe will play 5 or 10 times a year, and so I'm part of that. And generally, they'll play heavy strategy games, but not war games. So it's a group of 4 to 6, and so as a result, the games that I most play and most appreciate lately tend to be heavy business games, things like Power Grid or Automobile. Um,
Okay,
yeah.
that's really interesting. What do you play at WBC?
Well, I play those two for one,
Okay.
and I have occasionally dabbled in Sekigahara, but mostly I just run that tournament, and I no
Hmm.
longer do that either. In fact, I missed the tournament this past year. I'll it, just a few old standards really is what I'm into at the tournament.
Okay, good. And on a more personal side, so you're a pretty successful businessman. I think we can say that. And I was wondering, thinking about that and your relationship with gaming, do you feel like your gaming habits, at least the one that you had maybe being younger, shaped maybe the way you work, the way you operate in a more professional setting?
Well, I wonder that sometimes because I did have that heavy background in gaming, but I don't believe that it changed too much the way I've approached work. Games are an unusual case in that you know all the rules if you're playing well, if you've read the rules, if you know the game, you know all the rules, including the ones that are on the components, and you know the possible outcomes. And that's such a different situation from business, or for that matter, for anything in real life, where the rules are always uncertain. You don't know the total set of possible things that can come into the universe, and the results are not polarized. So there's a limited connection there. I think gaming can help you slightly in that it rewards intensity and reminds you to constantly be checking yourself for how well you think you're doing. A constant evaluatory cycle is part of being a good gamer, and I think that that's very useful in real life. But otherwise, I think that they're fairly far apart. One thing that I do see connections with, though, is building an organization and designing a game. So I don't just play them; I also design them, and the designing side of it is more similar to what I do professionally. Trying to plan the way the company works is not totally unlike trying to create mechanisms that will lead to a good game.
That makes me think about a game. I don't know if you've played it, but I would be curious to have your opinion on it if you did. Have you played Food Chain Magnate?
No, I haven't.
So it's a very, so if you are into heavy strategy business kind of game, so it's a game by Splinterspellen, which is a pretty almost cult company from the Netherlands,
Oh, I
and all of their games are very deep, very interesting. I love Antiquity. I don't know if you've played this one. Very, a lot of different layers. But Food Chain Magnate is really cool because a core part of the game is actually setting up an organization, and you start from the CEO, and you actually create or the organigram of your company, and that triggers all of the different actions that you can take during a turn. And what you were saying made me think about this, and I was thinking, oh my god, you playing Food Chain Magnate could be extremely fun. Something to consider. Uh,
Oh,
but
I'll
so
look that up. I've played Roads and Boats, so I'm familiar with the company, but I'll definitely look that up.
yeah, I would definitely recommend that. And if you want to ever play it online, you know, you know where to find me now. So that could be that could be great.
Yes.
Now beyond the gaming side, I was wondering what made you want to become a game designer specifically, because like it's a pretty big step. You can enjoy gaming all your life without even considering making a game. What triggered that appetite to actually start making your own?
Yeah, that's right. Well, when I grew up, and I put that in quotes, I left gaming behind for a few years. I thought, this is it. I'm in the real world. I'm going to be so terribly serious about my job that I'll leave behind all these things that have given me happiness as I grew up. And a few years after that, I realized I didn't want to leave games behind, and I decided to re-engage with them and start playing the tournament. And when I did that, I challenged myself. Essentially, if I'm going to do this hobby, let me do it entirely. Let me achieve something in it. Let me bring the best that I have to gaming. And for me, the total way to be involved was to be a participant in tournaments and also a designer. So that was sort of my bargain with myself. If I'm going to do this, just do it entirely.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting approach to it. And I was wondering, still on that personal side, talking about game design. So Sekigahara was released a decade ago. It has been in the top 5 war games for on BGG for quite a while now. And I'm wondering, just on a personal note, how does that feel to actually make one war game and it's like reaching the top and just being there and staying there for a decade?
Well, I'm delighted with it. I'm so pleased that people have enjoyed it, and it's given me more happiness to see how much people like it than I imagined I could get out of designing a game. So actually, I'm really pleased with it, and it's always a pleasure to go to a tournament or hear someone online saying that they appreciate it, especially when they appreciate it for the things that I was trying to do in the game, for the elegance or the way that history was rendered through mechanisms rather than chrome. And when they appreciate those very things, then it's very satisfying.
But now that we're talking about your games, I would like to shift from, now that we talked about you getting into gaming and into game design, and start talking about you as a designer and the way you approach design.
Yeah.
And there is already a comment that is about this. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about tonight is when Sekigahara was released, it was recognized for being a beautiful game, which is not necessarily something that was that important in wargaming in 2010. It has become a lot more over the last decade, that there are a lot more efforts to actually make game appealing visually. So it was, in a sense, quite ahead of its time. And I was wondering, is this something that was important for you that you actually pushed?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, it was. To me, gaming, like any experience, but any experience you're going to indulge in, that you're going to put your discretionary time into, should be a multi-sensorial experience, which is to say, it shouldn't simply appeal to your mind. It should appeal to your eyes, and going beyond that, it should the way it sounds, right, or the way it feels. So the way it feels when you fish in the bag to grab the next reinforcement block, or the way it sounds when you move a block or flip a block. All of those sensorial cues were interesting and meaningful to me. I also wanted it to be a lower frustration game, in that you didn't have to manipulate the pieces in order to fully understand the situation. So the pieces are broad enough, the blocks are, that they stack and you can see the total display of your units without having to, as in a typical block game, finger through them to see what units you have in a combined stack, right? The stack is vertical. You can see it just by looking. All those things, those are really important to me, all those details.
Yeah, and I really agree. I think it's like thinking about games as physical objects, those board games, that's what makes them unique. The fact that the rules are in our heads, that the interaction between players make the game, but also the fact that there is a sensual aspect to it, like we're touching them, we're interacting with them physically, is really important.
We
And
should delight in that. Yes, I'm sorry to cut you off there.
No, go ahead.
Like, a game is a physical object, and at the same time, it's a series of instructions. And in both of those ways, we can revel in the difference between this and another kind of a game. If it is going to be physical, let's make it a pleasure to interact with its physicality. And if it is it's just a set of instructions that's made to run not on a computer, but on the operating system in a human mind, then let's optimize for that operating system, not burden it, optimize for it. It's very important to me that the game be playable. And I really think about the friction that goes into a game, removing impedance and every stop step. Like a moment ago, I mentioned that you shouldn't have to flip through your blocks to see what your units are. Well, the reason is you'd be flipping through your blocks dozens of times a game. That would be part of the cycle of a play, and that's friction. So it's really important to me to minimize that and to optimize for the human operating system, not just allow it to be played there, but really to optimize for what the human mind can do.
Yeah, I really think in the user experience kind of way when you're thinking about the game as an object. And in that regard, how is your generally relationship with graphic designers when you're working on a project? How do you like to work with them?
Yes, well, I hope to find a commonality of intention between myself and the graphic designer. I'm looking for elegance and recognizability and simplicity and a visual appeal that is serious, historical if necessary, frivolous, no, not frivolous. For me, a game is a serious thing. I know it's fun, but as a creator of a game, and seeing as I do take games seriously, I want it to have a certain amount of historical fidelity or at least cultural fidelity, and look like something that it's possible to take seriously.
And to build up on this, there is we're going to take a first question from the chat here, and the chat is becoming really active, so that's really good to see. But Steven is asking, so now that we're on the topic of graphic design, Sekigahara has a unique and very attractive artwork. Was there something that inspired that work? So what was the inspiration around the graphic design for Sekigahara?
Well, it's supposed to look Japanese. It's supposed to look tasteful, subtle, discreet, clear, like a mon, right? Like that's the inspiration. I think Mark Mahaffey did a really nice job with the graphics on the board, and the way the pieces look on the board. I agree. It ended up being very appealing, and we were just trying to utilize Japanese cues in the design.
Okay. But talking more generally, so as a French reviewer, I'm sensitive to something that's called the idea of the auteur theory. I don't know if you know that in film, but that's the idea that a designer, well, it's normally for a filmographer, but you should think about his work as a whole and think about games on the elements of the work as a whole. And while thinking about this, I was looking at two of your games. The only two that I know of. I haven't played Charioteer and Timecode yet, but I was looking at Magnet and Sekigahara, and I was trying to figure out what is the personal stamp. What makes those two games a Matt Calkins game? And for those who don't know, Magnet is an abstract strategy game that was released by Z-Man in 2008. And Sekigahara was released 3 years after. I don't know which one has been designed first, and that's maybe something that we can discuss. But I was looking at them as a whole, and I think I found something that I wanted to talk to you about. I think that those two games have some similarities in the sense that they are both the opposite reflection of the other, in the sense that when you make an abstract strategy game, in a sneaky way, you integrate element from mechanics from the wargaming culture. And the other way around, when you make a war game, you actually integrated elements from abstract strategy games. And I'm going to illustrate this just for the viewers to understand where I'm leading with that. Magnet has this very clever dynamic that pieces have a value system when they move.
Yes.
And it makes it for a sort of weird stratego. But the way it does that is that you're pivoting block, like in a pure Columbia block game. You have your block, you move it, and you change the value of your block itself. But also the move itself. You place the magnet, and all units move toward the magnet. Is exactly, if we keep the wording that they use in Columbia games, it's a muster move. It means that you move towards the point all of your blocks. And I was thinking, wait a minute, that's an abstract Columbia block game in a way. And then on the other hand, I'm thinking it's about Sekigahara. It does have a very strong theme. It's very clear like what it's representing, but it does contain abstract strategy games element. The minimalistic map that you talked about could be potentially viewed as a sort of a simple grid or something like this. But also I was thinking about one specific element. You have 3 king pieces in Sekigahara.
Yes.
Pieces that you take to do an instant win. So you have Tokugawa, Ishida, and Toyotomi. And the other thing is that you don't make damage to pieces, you take them. You kill a block, you take it from the opponent. And I was
Right.
like, well, this is chess. And I was wondering, is this all intended, or am I completely wrong? Or is it this that you are actually, one is the reverse of the other?
Oh, well, this is a really smart question. Thank you for being so thoughtful about the design elements in these games. I think the reason why both of them seem like a blend between abstract and wargame, and maybe even some other elements that you can't even classify as either abstract or wargame, is because I love mechanisms. I love like knowing about mechanisms and thinking about them and inventing them, and I draw them from all over the place. And maybe a wargaming mechanism is more suitable in an abstract game. Well, I have no reason not to use it, and maybe some abstract mechanisms would be better in a war game, and I'm happy to go there. Uh, I I to me the essence of creating a game it might is to begin with a complex situation that fascinates me and attempt to find or invent a series of mechanisms that convey it best through the human operating system into elegant playability. And that means that the effort of making a game is one of honing and selecting the best mechanism, relentless improvement of mechanisms. That matters. That's the primary thing to me. And I'll go anywhere to get the right mechanism or invent the mechanism as the case may be. But the work in logic to depict a historical situation is what I love best about making a game.
And that's interesting. So I'm actually curious about what triggers your appetite to actually want to make a game about a specific topic. Is it pure serendipity? You just find out about something and then all of a sudden you're like, I want to make a game about this? Or is there maybe like a more conscious process about what you're going to be doing a game on?
Yes. In Sekigahara, it was more conscious. I had studied Japanese history in college. And when I decided to be serious about making games, almost immediately I thought, I must make a game about Japanese history. And I did that before I knew what the mechanisms would be, before I knew which conflict I would choose, before anything. I just thought, I want to do this. And so I did. And it took me a while to arrive at the right conflict. But that was an idea first. I think later, when I expose myself to history or to real life situations, I naturally adapt them into mechanisms. I just enjoy thinking that way. And so sometimes I think, well, this is a really good mechanism and I should go ahead and use that. One of the challenges I like to pursue is the idea that a game should make the player feel like the protagonist in the game, which I think Sekigahara is an example of when I tried to do that. Try to give the person the same uncertainties, the same experience, the same decision set, the same personal risks. Many games, war games particularly, which otherwise are very historical, don't actually embody the person into the protagonist. They give instead a kind of a God's eye view. And I'm very interested in the protagonist's position, which why you have those three kings or personal elimination pieces in Sekigahara. I wanted to like that's part of what I'm struggling with. I want to take as realistic a position as possible, actual historical events, actual protagonist, and then simulate what it is like to be that person at that time with whatever mechanisms I can create.
Yeah, that's really interesting because war games and role-playing game come from a similar route. So in a way, you're bringing war game back more toward some of the role-playing elements.
Like chainmail, right? You had
yes, exactly. Yeah. So that's an interesting way to see it. There is a question in the chat from Pierre who's wondering if you consider revisiting Sekigahara as a system, but in a very different setting. There was Grenada that was released by Compass last year. That Pierre is apparently enjoying. I have it. It's still on my shelf of shame. Still haven't played it. One day I will. But is it something that you considered, or once the system is done, you want to move out to something new?
Yes. I am unlikely to revisit a system. To me, the delight of making a game is largely in inventing new systems. And if you've seen what I've done with 4 games, I have 1 abstract, 1 business, 1 war game, 1 racing game. I haven't even repeated a genre, never mind a mechanism. I don't have too much time to put into it, and I love the exploration. So I am unlikely to reuse it. I believe it should be reused. I think it would really fit very well in other situations. Not all situations, mind you, but there are other times when loyalty is uncertain, right? There's a major part of it where credibility is of the issue for each of the protagonists, and loyalty is a function of that credibility. I think that there are other cases that I could imagine that would use this system well, and I've been a little bit surprised that it hasn't found more usage. I was pleased to see that it's getting a little bit of a play, but I probably won't do another one with that system.
Yeah, that's great. So that's a interesting answer, and I wanted to keep building on this because in a way Sekigahara reminds a lot of Columbia block games, and that's obvious. And I was wondering, and I think I'm going to bring the question here from Alexandre, who actually is also going in that direction regarding the way you approach the design of Sekigahara. How much of it was inspired by those Columbia block games, and did you see your game as an iteration of that model?
Yeah. All right, first of all, let me say that I like those games. I have a very big collection of Columbia block games, and I give them credit for making many good ones. I've had fun playing them. At the same time, I didn't want to make another. I felt like they were dug into a certain set of mechanisms that I didn't think were ideal. And the reuse of those mechanisms irked me in certain. I didn't like the fact that they were so repetitive. I didn't think that one size fits all, that you could use the same thing on all genres. I particularly didn't like the ABC system where it inflated the variance of the conflict based on how you rolled your A dice. There were a number of things that I felt were really going in the wrong direction, as much as I absolutely like Columbia games and have really enjoyed some of their games. I felt like that we needed to take what was good about a block game and free it from everything that had accumulated on it. Block games shouldn't be such a dice fest. Block games shouldn't be so high variance. I was taking issue with all sorts of things. So the thing that I wanted to keep about block games was the uncertainty, the one-sided surprise, as I put in the designer's notes. I think there should be more one-sided surprises instead of two-sided surprises. Two-sided would be like a die roll or a random card off the top of a deck. Everybody's surprised. Nobody knew it was coming. I think that there needs to be uncertainty, but I would prefer it to be one-sided uncertainty, which leads to more of a bluffing situation than a let's see what happens situation. And so I loved that about block games. Hidden information, that was very good. Relatively fewer units. Block games encourage a certain generalization, if only because wood is expensive and you can't make 500 little pieces of it, right? So block games encouraged a certain sort of a high-level view, which I thought was appropriate. I think war games get into little details sometimes more than is fit for the protagonist's consciousness, right? I mean, if you're being the protagonist, you don't know all those things. You don't know how well your unit's going to fight. You don't know that it's got a combat value of 7. Absolutely not, right? You maybe know whether it's a veteran or not, but you have not, as the protagonist, as much knowledge as a war game typically assumes that you have. So I like the degree of abstraction and the slightly less knowledge that you have, especially about your enemy's troops, that come from a block game. If you go back to those old Columbia block games, one of the best things about them is their rule books are really short. And yet, despite that short rule book, you still get the feeling of being in that conflict. So the mechanisms, the fewer pieces, the uncertainty, even maybe the step losses, I mean, there was something to say for that. There were some really good ideas in there. And while I did not mean to create a sequel to them, in fact, I meant to really go off in my own direction and create a series of different mechanisms, really as novel as they could be, and in no way inherited from that excellent tradition that Columbia had put together. I still want to say that I admire what they did with several of their games.
Yeah. And Just what are your favorite Colombia war games? Then, taking this into consideration, the thing that you think or
Yeah.
making the best use of those core mechanics that they introduced.
All right. Well, Napoleon's a classic. Of course, that wasn't originally theirs, but I've really enjoyed Napoleon. I'd say East Front was terrific, and I've
Yeah.
also played it on the West Front and so on. And I think it was at its best in the East Front. So that was particularly good. I guess I'd name those two as my favorites, but
And it's funny
there
because I
were
think
many
that
more strong.
East Front is still quite fresh. I played it really late. I think the first time I played it was a couple of years ago, and I was really surprised by how fresh the design was. And I was really considering people should play more East Front just to see how like a good design can stay relevant even after a while. Um, to
Yeah.
keep building on Sekigahara and the relationship with block game, there is a really interesting question here from Saverio, who's asking, are there any memorable darlings abandoned in Sekigahara design in the service to reducing that friction that you were talking about?
Yes. Yes. Well, yeah, I'm sure there were. I don't recall it now because it's been probably 10, 15 years since I was killing the darling, so to speak. But yeah, I passed through a lot of mechanisms in creating that, and the same with Charioteer. Actually, I my cycle of creating board games is to think of what ought to be perfect, and of course, you always feel like it's 80% done. From the day I invented the first concept for Sekigahara, I imagined it was 80% done. It was in fact nowhere close, and so you have to be optimistic, and then you create all the components and you test it and you realize that instead of 80% done, you're well somewhere short of 50 because it's clearly not there, and then so you need to back away from it. You have to back away far enough to realize the things that aren't good, because in the first impulse you've invested yourself in those mechanisms. You felt they were good. You took the time to create the cards and the blocks and the map, and now you need to de-invest, and sometimes that takes a while. So I'm glad that I design slowly. It takes a while to remove yourself. It's a natural kind of an emotional process to remove yourself from the game, to the point where when you re-encounter it, you can re-encounter it dispassionately and say, these parts are good, these parts are not as good, and they don't deserve to be part of the game. So I don't recall which elements I discarded, but I can say that in that sort of that cycle of assertion and then withdrawal and then assertion and then withdrawal, I remove from games that I design. I remove the things that I don't think are wonderful.
That's interesting. Yeah, the removing yourself from the game is an interesting thought. And it made me think about something. What's the kind of relationship you have with the game developers? I know that for me it's really important because it's actually, so I have a strong relationship with Joe Dewhurst, with which I'm developing all of my games, and he's the one removing me from the games. So that helps me. Like I need someone to take me and get me out and be more dispassionate. How do you do that? Is it pure mental discipline, or do you also have a relationship with like developers that help you actually also remove yourself from the game and make those decisions when you're designing?
I haven't relied on a developer in this regards. Sekigahara was just as I wanted it to be. And the one time that a developer asserted themselves, I worked with Rio Grande on my game Tin Goose. And Jay Tummelson, who runs Rio Grande, insisted that I put an alternative rule at the end of the game to allow for, to essentially force a regularized distribution of event cards versus playing cards. All right, certain cards will allow you to add new aircraft to the auction, and other cards will allow you to create a negative event like a strike or a crash or an oil price shock. And Jay felt that we needed to make regular the ratio between those cards. I thought we didn't need to. He really insisted, and he forced it into the rules. And soon after, he got back to me and said that he was wrong about that, and I knew he was wrong about that. It was that wasn't actually as good of a collaboration as I would have liked. in Tin Goose, I felt like I didn't get the cooperation in terms of schedule, in terms of the packaging quality, in terms of like disagreeing with me about what the rules should be. That was a less fruitful collaboration than I've had with GMT.
Okay, and then you came back to home. You came back to GMT. Yes, makes sense.
Not quite.
And so, apart from magnets, your three games have historical topics or setting. And there is a question here that I had in my list, but Bruno is actually also putting it in an interesting way. So I'm going to take his question here. Bruno is asking, how do you assess whether a historical moment is suitable to be adapted for a board game? And then I would build up on that. And yeah, what makes you specifically want to make the board game about it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love history. I'm really into it. I read a lot of history books. I have a history club that meets once a month that spends an entire evening discussing a single year from the past. And we've all done research and we come together and we talk about that year. So history fascinates me, and I could go to any place in history and find the material for a good game. Naturally, I'd want it to be something that was competitive, a situation that could have fallen in multiple directions, with the variable or divergent outcomes. But I would enjoy making games out of all sorts of things. So it really comes down less to the suitability of the historical moment and more down to my interest in making a game and focusing on it.
And this part, this history club idea is really interesting. This idea of focusing on a specific year, and I'm really curious about that, but also about your research process as a designer. When you approach research, is it only books, or are you missing books, movies, podcasts, maybe something? And beyond that, do you also like to find primary material, like things that were written by people that were there, or potentially also finding objects? Like, how do you get inspired? How do you get into an era?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a joy to get into an era. I start with books, and I'm a reader, so that's my primary means of being learned on a topic. But in the case of Sekigahara, knowing how important the roads were going to be to the design, I literally went to Japan and walked the roads. I hiked the Nakasendo between a few of those towns. Of course, that gave me an excuse for hiking, which is another one of my hobbies. But I know what the Nakasendo is like. I've been on those old cobblestones, and they are remarkably narrow. For our players today who enjoy playing Sekigahara and think of that as a highway, that's barely a path. That's a path through the forest on which maybe 5 men could walk abreast, or perhaps only 4. It's a narrow road, and that's a highway back then. So I think it gives you a perspective, actually, just how difficult it was to move an army. There's a reason why Tokugawa chose to break his army into 3 separate groups. And it's because he was maxing out the roads, right? He sent one along the Tokaido, one along the Nakasendo, and then another one with his son along the Nakasendo to follow. And that one never even made it to the battle site on time. He was waylaid doing a siege. So the road narrowness was something I researched in person.
But that's great. And for those players who complain about those road rules, that they were too complex and you want to move more and faster and all this, well, it all makes sense now. Like now why it's important that those rules are there. But that's great. Maybe to finish that part around your design process and how you work, I was curious about, are there specific designers today or from the last decade that you were particularly inspired by?
Well, there are. And again, here I love war games, but it's going to be more difficult for me to cite examples if I haven't played them. So though there are war game designers that I have a lot of respect for, I'm going to go in a different direction here and talk about the designers whose games I have played repeatedly. And so I admire Knizia for elegance. And elegance, if you see in my designs, I'm aiming for the same thing. Elegance is very important to me. The ease with which a game flows through the mind, the intuitiveness and simplicity of the rules, the evidentness of the situation, the ability to play on your first game as maybe not as well, but close to as well as you'll be able to play on your 5th game or your 10th game. I don't want you to have to work at being able to express yourself through the game. Knizia is very good at these things. And so I think he'd come at or near the top of a list of designers. I have a lot of games by Martin Wallace, and I like those as well. Lately, I've been impressed. This is an odd misfit. Lately, I've been really impressed with Gaia Project. And it's just the kind of game that I never have time to play. 14 factions. I may not even play this game 14 times, right? Because it's hard for me to get like that commitment at a table. So I know I'm just very unlikely to reach the top of the learning curve in Gaia Project. And yet I find it really well designed and balanced and an enjoyable puzzle.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Gaia Project and the earlier one, Terra Mystica, those games that have the combination of actually being pretty complex, but also very fluid in the way that once you have the game in your mind, like it flows really. So I can see that relationship. What would you say are currently your top 5 games? Because knowing that you don't play war games as much as you want, so let's open it to top 5 war games.
Yes. All right. I mean, if I had to name top 5 war games, I'd go back to classics that I have played, right? Games that I have good memories of: Napoleon, Russian Campaign, East Front, Hannibal, Paths of Glory. There's some games that I've got a lot of respect for, but I don't play them, not much. So let me talk about ones that I do play. I'll put Gaia Project in there because I've really been enjoying it lately. My sort of all-time, my go-to when people ask me what my favorite game is, I usually say Acquire, because of its elegance, right? More than 50 years old, absolutely standing the test. It's over quickly. It does not always do justice, but it's over right before you mind it too much. I like its exercise in memory and the simplicity of the rule set. A really elegant masterpiece. I also favor Automobile being a remarkably good game. Doesn't get the attention it deserves, in my opinion, from Martin Wallace. I like Power Grid, and I should put something by Knizia in there. So maybe Ingenious, Tigris and Euphrates, something like that.
Yeah, one of them, anyone. People can pick themselves.
He's got a few very good ones. Rhinelander is much better than people think.
Yeah, that's interesting, and none of them have historical theme, right? Or not strong historical themes.
Knizia's
Tigris and Euphrates is
the closest Knizia ever got to a genuine historical theme was Lord of the Rings, and I say that half in jest, but that was genuinely thematic, right? I mean, if he had just done the Lord of the Rings treatment for a historical event, we would be praising it as a fairly historical thing, but. No, he's a mathematician. His games are mechanisms first and themes later. Whereas I believe that my games are characterized by mechanisms, differentiated by mechanisms, but I start with when they're their best anyway, I start with a real life event to try to handle with mechanisms. And so the sand grain is author of the pearl. Rather than beginning with mathematical perfection and then deciding it depicts, I don't know, whale riders or whatever.
And now to move into the final part of this interview, I want to talk about the game that gave us the opportunity to chat today, Charioteer. Just been released now by GMT. The P500 has been shipped. It's going to be I think available in stores at some point in the near future. Right. I was wondering, maybe can you tell us what's the setting of this game?
Yes, well, it is chariot racing in ancient Rome. It's the Circus Maximus.
And my question is, what triggered your the idea of making a game on this? Did you late at night watch the Ben-Hur once again, and you were like, I need to do a game on this scene or something like this? Where did it all started?
No, I don't think I've ever watched anything as research for any game I've created. Instead, this is I broke my rules on this. I wanted to write a game that was more approachable, and and I really like Sekigahara, but I realize that it isn't for everybody, because there still are a bunch of mechanisms you have to internalize to play it, and you need 3 hours or 2 if you're quick, and it's just asking a little bit too much. And I wanted to create something that brought gaming to people more broadly, that introduced them and maybe gave them the pleasure that I feel in discovering a new game. And so I wanted to create a game that played in under an hour. That was my first mandate to myself. I need to create something that is so compact and so playable that it will be done in under an hour without losing the strategic element, and without losing the frequency of decisions. Like, there still have to be a lot of decisions. I was thinking 20, right? You've got to be able to have 20 interesting decisions and be done within an hour. And there should, furthermore, there should still be strategy. So when I approached this game, this chariot racing game, I wasn't thinking at all about chariots. And I realized that that's backwards from the way I generally like to design. But in this case, I thought, I need something that is approachable. And so I challenged myself to design a game that could be that on-ramp and would be packed with strategy in a brief period of time. I know there's a lot of games that play quickly, and the world isn't missing fast-playing games, but they're not generally dense with strategy or even dense with decisions. They play almost on autopilot, or the decisions seem obvious, or the decisions are optimization decisions instead of planning decisions. And so I wanted to try to take the things I love about a game and compact them into a hard diamond, right? Into a 1 hour episode. So no, it didn't come from thinking about chariot racing. In fact, the theme, honestly, it's an afterthought. I mean, I used it a little bit, but the heart
That's
of
very
this game,
Kinesia. That's your.
I know, and I'm not trying to be Knizia. Nobody can be better than he is at it. But the theme is an afterthought, and though it is influential, and I did end up guiding the game around the theme a little bit, it is fundamentally an act of density, right? Of compaction of what I think is interesting in a game down. Can you get 20 decisions into 1 hour, right? I mean, that was the challenge. And so can you take all of the hair off those decisions? Can you streamline them? Can you make them simultaneous? Can you still make there be planning and long-term consequences, but they're quick, right? They move right through your mind. And in the end, I decided that if I'm going to create a mechanism like that, the output of it ought to be so fundamental that the output ought to be utterly fundamental. In this case, it's a number. Every time you play a move, the output of whatever optimization you just did, you matched some cards, you made some decisions, it's a number. I played my 12. I'm moving 12 forward. Now I'm also, increasing my skill in that category, but that's kind of obvious, right? And maybe I had an effect on the damage that was coming into me, or the damage that I was carrying. There's a few things there, but I tried to simplify so much. And when you simplify to that degree, you're left with a fairly unidimensional output. And so I fit the theme, racing, where you just want to go forward. I fit the theme around the constraints of the mechanism challenge. The mechanism had to be so simple that its output had to be so linear that the game had to be something that depicts a linear movement. That's really how I got to chariot racing.
You got me super excited. So that, because I haven't played it yet, a copy is on its way, and we're planning to do a teach and play in January. So if you can be there, that would be great. I usually like to have the designers on the show for playing with them, and trying to put together a 5 or 6 player game in January would be awesome. So now I'm super excited, and it made me think. So racing game is not a new thing in board games. There are actually a lot of them, and I was wondering what games actually were you inspired by? What other racing game inspired your approach?
Yeah, what I'm actually trying to do is be different from racing games, even though there's some terrific racing games out there, of course, and games which I'm not trying to duplicate or improve upon. I would just create an alternative. My intention is to do something that racing games typically don't do, which is to all through the game, you're thinking about your strategy. On your first turn, you should be thinking about your last turn, because the move you make right now will influence the skills that you've built up. For those who haven't played Charioteer, maybe I need to explain just a little bit. You have 4 core skills, and when you meld sets out of your hand, you're playing a move of one of 4 different kinds. Either it's a sprint, a recovery, an attack, or a corner, like going around corners. And so whatever you're playing, you're actually building your skill in that. There's a skill track, and you are honing your ability to do that. And by the end of the game, you may be racking big bonuses in that type of move. And so from the beginning, you want to be thinking about your development and whether you plan to concentrate in 2 skills or 1 skill or what is it, versus being expedient and just making the best use of whatever cards are in your hand. There's some fluctuating incentives to make certain kinds of moves. Like the Emperor has a preference. And if you go with his preference, which is random every turn, if you go with that preference, then you'll be rewarded with a little bit more learning. So generally conforming to the Emperor is a long-term play. And the sort of thing that you'd probably be heavily incented to early in the game, and your incentive would decline as the game went on, particularly in colors that you didn't think that you were going to bonus in. And then also you've got crowd cards that you're allowed to match. And every turn has a specific crowd card. And if you match it, well, first of all, that opportunity is here for 1 turn and then gone. And if you match it, you obviously are going to have a better move in that color. But maybe that's pulling you away from the strategy you want to do, and maybe that's pulling you in a different direction from what the Emperor wants to do. So you have some decisions to make about short-term optimization, and you have to keep in mind the long-term as well. So creating a racing game, which is fundamentally a very tactical thing. If you look at the racing games generally, they're about optimizing right now. Like, how do I handle this move? And next move, I'll worry about next move. This was supposed to be a more strategic consideration, a balance between your future best interests and your present best interests. And so I wanted to create that tension, which for me enlivened the idea of a racing game from something that I probably wouldn't play to something that I would be interested in playing. So that was one key thing. And then secondly, I wanted to test this idea. There's a rut that games have fallen into that I don't like, whereby a card does something and you play the card to do that thing. And you have maybe a set of cards and they each do a thing, and you can pick which one you want. And then whenever you play it, that's the thing that you do. And in the end, whatever 6 things you've got in your hand are the 6 things you're going to do. And it's just, you're really just picking the order. That doesn't interest me very much, because I don't like the trade-offs. And I feel like a great deal of responsibility for good play or bad play comes down to the deck and what card it gave you. And so I wanted trade-offs, right? What I was trying to do with these 20 moves, and usually it takes 22 or 23 moves to finish a game of Charioteer. What I wanted to do with these decisions is make them honest trade-offs. And so instead of having one card that does one thing, in Charioteer, it takes multiple cards to do anything, because you need a set in order to do something. And every card is actually good for more than one thing. So there's multiple sets that every card could have been part of. And if you choose to make it part of the set you're playing right now, you're also choosing that you won't have that card later on when you want to make a set of whatever else that card was good at. I like that basic trade-off, and I wanted to incorporate that into my design, just to indicate that such a thing is a possible way that games could evolve in. Instead of one card plays and one purpose cards, now these are multi-card plays and multi-purpose cards.
And thinking back at what you're saying in our earlier conversation, you were talking about how important for you it was to bring back immersion, make the players be someone specific. And I think Charioteer does that. You're actually playing a Charioteer. That's the thing. But I wanted to build on that and ask you maybe a sneaky question. Is
Yes.
All of those characters in Charioteer, they're just colors. They don't have names. Why didn't you name them?
Okay. I think that I really didn't put you in the Charioteer's position in this case. You might as well be the faction. You might as well be the whole chariot, or maybe just, I don't think there's much of a difference in this case between being the faction or being the driver. your decisions are essentially the same. And so I don't think that I differentiated in this case. I did in a more complex design like Sekigahara, but in this case, it could be either one. And that's a possible avenue for an expansion. Actually, you could have slightly divergent charioteers, and I've thought about how to do it, but I didn't put it into this this release. It's something that could easily be done if there was interest. Actually, I think Sekigahara could easily have been expanded as well if there's interest. But
and there was interest in Sekigahara, so definitely.
There was actually some fascinating interest. There was somebody who sent me a beautiful expansion that they had done of Sekigahara with additional clans, and they did such a wonderful job. And unfortunately, I wasn't in a place to spend a lot of time putting an expansion out there. But I saw some truly impressive creativity. So. Yeah.
But would you be open to this idea that if you have a designer coming up with a proposal for an expansion, for example, for Charioteer, to expand on this and maybe have name Charioteers and everything, and would you be open to actually give your stamp of approval of having an expansion coming from GMT to expand on a game that you've designed?
I don't know. I haven't thought about that at all. I would say that I would be delighted to have others use my mechanisms for their own designs. I feel like the best contribution that I've made with these designs, other than just a really strict commitment to elegance, is the originality of some of these mechanisms. That's the greatest fun for me, is coming up with unique systems that depict an event. So if they were to catch on, I would be very pleased.
That's good to hear. So you've heard it here first. So coming up next, an expansion for Charioteer. No, I'm just joking. You didn't say that, but it was a potential. But it's an interesting thought. I think it's. I like the idea of potentially expanding it and giving more more specific, maybe a bit of asymmetry in the characters that you play. So that's actually quite fascinating. And maybe to conclude my line of questioning here, what I was wondering is, now that Charioteer is out, is there already something that you have in the corner of your eye, thinking about something that inspires you and you feel, oh, that could be an interesting topic that I should get interested in?
Yes, in fact, I've almost finished the next design after this, and it's a sports game. It's going to be P500 in the spring. So you'll see it's going to
big announcement.
It's going to be from GMT. It's P500. I don't have a name yet, but the mechanism is entirely different from anything you've seen. And I particularly enjoy coming up with something that will surprise people.
And do we already know which sport, or can you say that much?
Yes.
Yeah,
it's going to be tennis and squash. Right, so two sides of the same board. This is the current plan: tennis and squash, and in both cases, it will be based on promotable dice, depicting the different skills that you have. Promotable dice.
Okay, interesting. So you're building a dice engine. The better you get, the better dice you have, and that's going to trigger.
Like that. That's right. A dice engine for racket sports. So.
Interesting. I would have expected, because you're from an American perspective, thinking about a strategic game. For me, both football and baseball are highly strategic, so I would have think about that. But it does. I'm actually quite curious now. So in spring, okay, I would keep an eye for that.
Yes.
That's really interesting. And so we're getting close to the hour mark here. We're aiming for 1 hour. There is one thing, question that I saw in the chat I wanted to bring up before we finish, because I think it's an interesting question and probably something that would be a nice wrap-up conclusion. And it's a question from Potato Chip 1993, asking if you had any advice for aspiring designers, or maybe advice that you would give to your younger self when you started designing.
Wow. All right. Yes. The first is to not feel that you need to copy any kind of game. Don't be like anything else. Be really original. And play with game design all the time. Think about it all the time. It's a terrific thing to have in the back of your mind as you're commuting, for example, or as you're falling asleep, or any of the things that don't take your full bandwidth. You can always be working on a game behind back of your mind. If you're writing a novel, you need the manuscript. If you're writing a game, you've got it all, right? It's stored in your memory. So it's a terrific thing to just bring out and puzzle with at all times. So think about games all the time, make mechanisms all the time, make designs, and then only go forward with your favorites. Right? It's so much work trying to get a game published. You should only do it if you simply love the game, right? That and it take your time to get to that point and be as original as you want. Definitely don't feel that that the thing you need is to look a lot like another game or even another genre. To me, the best way to do a game is to be strikingly divergent, and because that's what the world needed, right? Not an echo of something that people already love, but a new thing, a new horizon. So be original, be focused, feel free to make games and not go forward with them. I don't know if you can see it, but back on my desk here, there's probably the bones of 5 games that I haven't chosen to move forward with. For any game that I would want to publish, I make several that I don't want to publish, and that's fine, right? The satisfaction in the hobby is in thinking of new mechanisms. To me, the design, the private design, is as fulfilling as the public design. You should only go public and take on all that work when you have something that you're really pleased with.
And out of curiosity, just to illustrate, do you have maybe one of those never done games, like something that you can show, just to show a bit of something that never will be?
Unfortunately, they're scattered here, so I
Okay.
have pieces in dishes on the standing desk, but the boards are over there, and I'm not in a position right now to have an exposition on games
Fair.
that don't deserve to be published.
Fair enough. Maybe for another discussion. But I think those are great advice. And as Alan was saying, actually, in a lot of ways, it's an advice that applies to beyond board gaming. So that's really interesting. I wanted to thank you again for taking the time, making the surprise announcement of an upcoming game. And Rachel was here in the chat saying you heard it first. So yeah, so that's really good, and I really appreciate the fact that you took an hour to discuss about all this. It was really interesting discussion. So thanks a lot. Any last words before we end the stream?
Yeah, I'd like to thank all the participants. You only found out about this a day ago because we only lined it up just recently, and yet you're here with great questions. I just want to be really appreciative of the audience today. Thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoy the games, and I've really enjoyed having this dialogue with you. And Fred, this is a terrific show. It's great to be part of it.
Thank you very much. I hope that you'll be back. As I said, January, I want to have a live stream teach and play of Charioteer. I already found some guests, so we're ready to go. We just need to find a date. And for all of those you watching, so know that in January we'll be back, hopefully with Matt again, to do a live stream of Charioteer. This should be a lot of fun. And thanks for all of you who've been here. Remember to like the video, to subscribe, support us on Ko-fi. And see all of you next week for teach and play of Fall of Saigon. Notice how I said it in French. I just realized that doesn't matter. So we'll be here on Sunday. So be there. And thanks to everyone, and have a great rest of your evening. Bye-bye.